I think we'll start the webinar today. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the new Lancet series, Early Childhood Development in the Next 1000 Days. Before beginning, we're just going to do a few housekeepings. One is if you can introduce yourself in the chat to everyone, let us know where you're calling in from. Next is if you have questions, if you can put them in the Q&A. And don't put them in the chat because the chat gets really busy, and we'll have the panelists answer directly or in the Q&A as well. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Elizabeth Lule, who's the Executive Director of the Early Childhood Development Action Network, to welcome and introduce the webinar. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Shekufe. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be connecting from. My name is Elizabeth Lule. I'm the Executive Director of the Early Childhood Development Action Network. For those who are not familiar with ECDAN, we are a global network of about 350 partners and over 30,000 individual followers on our various platforms. We were established by the World Bank and UNICEF way back in 2016 to catalyze collective action for greater impact and break down silos in which we operate as we support young children. We advocate to prioritize the early years. We exchange knowledge and learn together, and we support about 12 collaborative initiatives in which half of our partners participate. So a warm welcome to this important webinar on launching the new Lancet series on early childhood development and the next 1,000 days. We're delighted to have you join us for what promises to be an enlightening and impactful discussion. The first 1,000 days, spanning from conception to a child's second birthday, represent a pivotal window of opportunity that shapes lifelong health, cognitive development, and socio-economic outcome, and the case has been made already. The case for nurturing care across early childhood to adolescence has also been established. However, what nurturing care looks like in these different stages of the life course, how many children are receiving the appropriate inputs, and whether our interventions are making a difference for children in different age groups is less well understood. The new Lancet series makes the case that we must continue to build on our efforts in the first 1,000 days of life, but tailor these efforts to meet the specific needs of young children in the next 1,000 days of life. It provides an update analysis of the benefits, costs, and investing in these interventions with a focus on low middle-income countries. This two-part series in the Lancet was published yesterday evening, and I hope many of you have already started reading it. Today, we are fortunate to have assembled a distinguished panel of the authors and experts in various fields of early childhood development who will unpack the key findings from this groundbreaking series. We will hear from the Lancet editor, Sabine Kleinert, and learn more on the key takeaways from the series from the lead authors. Following the presentation, we will have a panel discussion moderated by Shekufe Zonji, my colleague, and we will hear perspectives from colleagues at UNICEF, the World Bank, and UNESCO. We encourage you to actively participate in the Q&A session following the presentations. Your questions and perspectives are valuable in furthering this important conversation. And as we delve into this topic, let's remember that investing in the first 1,000 days is not just about individual children, but about shaping the future of our societies. The knowledge shared today has the potential to inform policies and practices that can positively impact generations to come. Without further ado, let's begin our exploration of this vital Lancet series on the first 1,000 days of life. And over to you, Sabine.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yes, so I'm Sabine Kleinert from the Lancet, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this webinar, marking the launch of this new Lancet series on early childhood development and the next 1,000 days. I was the editor shepherding this series through, and it's great to see it now published. I would like to also express a big thank you to the Early Childhood Development Action Network for really hosting and organizing this webinar for us. At the Lancet, we had a number of series and commissions on child and adolescent health over the years, starting with our first ever global health series, which was on child survival in 2003. That series looked at preventable deaths under the age of 5. The good news is under 5 mortality has really been reduced from 10.8 million deaths in the year 2000 to 5.3 million in 2019. But improving child survival is just the first step. A strong focus is also needed on best possible early child development. We have had 3 previous series on early child development in the Lancet in 2007, 2011, and 2016, highlighting the importance of targeted interventions, strengthening nurture and care, which is defined as overall health, nutrition, responsive caregiving, safety and security, and early learning. These previous series mainly focus on the first 1,000 days of life. Now, in this new series, the authors highlight the crucial and neglected period of the next 1,000 days, or the age 2 to 5, when many children don't receive the needed attention they had earlier with more frequent healthcare visits after birth or in the first 2 years of life, or the oversight and attention they have after 5 years of age when attending primary education. There's a crucial gap. In this next 1,000 days phase of development, children acquire vital skills, including social, motor, language, and literacy skills. These are foundations for future health and well-being, learning, and lifelong success. Yet in low and middle income countries, and you will hear more on this from the authors, almost 3/4 of children, or 182 million aged 3 or 4, have no access to adequate nurturing care. This series is an urgent call to action to pay more attention to this really important phase of life. So let me now introduce you to today's speakers, the authors of the series, who will be presenting the 2 papers to you. And there will be time for Q&A, so please put your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll pick that up after the presentations by the authors. The first paper will be presented by Aisha Yousafzai, who is professor at the Department of Global Health and Population at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and Catherine Draper, who is associate professor at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. The second paper will then be presented by Milagros Norris, who is co-director for research at the National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers University, and Günther Fink, who is a full professor at the University of Basel and head of the unit at the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute. Over to you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Sabine. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to start off today's presentation, in which we share the overview of the evidence and the key messages from this series. And I'd like to begin just by acknowledging that Catherine, Milagros, Günther, and I represent a much larger group of 27 authors, representing a host of countries and a host of expertise related to children's development. So why did we embark on a series in the next 1,000 days? Our purpose was to draw attention to this significant period within the life course. And rather than say that we're negating the investments in the first 1,000 days, we wanted to ensure that we absolutely build on the investments of the first 1,000 days. In paper 1, we focus on describing the situation of young children in this period of the life course with regards to their health and development. We focus on risks and protection factors and the nurturing care inputs and interventions, determining to what extent they meet the needs of young children in this period of the life course. And then in paper 2, we focus on the cost of inaction, the cost of not investing in the next 1,000 days of life. Next slide. So, as we dive into paper 1, we begin by describing the current situation with regards to the health and development of children in this crucial period of life. Next slide. As noted, when we talk about the next 1,000 days, we are broadly defining this as the period between 2 and 5 years of age. And this period of development is marked by a significant growth of skills such as children's motor, language, and social skills, as well as an expansion of skills such as self-regulation and executive functioning. And these can be described as goal-oriented behaviors that really help us to maintain focus, to plan, to reason, the types of skills that are essential for us to succeed in the classroom and later on in life to succeed in our workspaces and in our social spaces. So in this sensitive window of opportunity, we need to focus on how we mitigate the risks and promote the protective factors to help us build these skills for a healthy developmental and behavioral trajectory. And it's important to note that while home and family continue to be important, we also need to pay attention increasingly to the environments outside of family and home that young children in this period are exposed to, including community spaces and early childhood care and education. So this is a real opportunity to build on those early gains and recalibrate trajectories where opportunities may have been lost. Next slide. So as we all know, the nurturing care framework continues to be important, not only in the first 1,000 days, but throughout childhood and adolescence. And specifically in the next 1,000 days, our goal is to continue to support development, including indicators of school readiness through comprehensive multi-sectoral actions. Next slide. In paper 1, the authors began by conducting a series of detailed evidence reviews across the environments young children in this period of the life course are growing up in, with a focus on low and middle income countries. These reviews included evidence pertaining to children's health, developmental delay and disability, nutrition, parenting, violence in children's environments, the mental health of both caregivers and young children, the involvement of fathers, early childhood care and education, and of course, the climate. Next slide, please. So while there is a great deal of detail in these reviews, we want to highlight 4 main messages here. The first is that we need to continue to build on parenting investments from the first 1,000 days and carry them through to the next 1,000 days. Unfortunately, we found that there were fewer evaluated parenting interventions tailored to the developmental needs of young children in the next 1,000 days in low and middle income countries. In order to do this and to really meet the needs of young children in the family and home environment, we need to ensure that we're not only supporting and promoting healthy development, but we're providing guidance and support that prevents violence against children, that engages fathers, that addresses the mental health of their caregivers and of young children themselves, and pays more attention to social emotional development, which we know is crucial for success in education and success in terms of adult outcomes. Secondly, access, equity, and quality to care and learning outside of the home really matter in this period of life. Before the pandemic, only just over half of pre-primary children in the majority world were enrolled in early childhood care and education spaces, and there was inequity between and within countries. Reviews consistently show that access to good quality programs benefits children's outcomes. However, the majority of these evaluations focus on cognition, and we need to pay more attention to social emotional development. We know that there tends to be larger effects for more disadvantaged children, for example, those growing up in more impoverished environments, and there are equal benefits for girls and boys, but we need to pay far more attention to quality, particularly if we want sustainable benefits at scale. Next slide, please. Thirdly, we need to advance multi-sectoral actions. For example, micronutrient deficiencies, anemia, undernutrition persist in this age group, along with increasing rates of overweight and obesity in childhood. And while the health sector was a key sector in supporting the promotion of nutrition in the early period of life, we need to take advantage of new opportunities in the second 1,000 days. And this includes understanding how early childhood care and education services may support healthy nutrition outcomes for young children. And finally, there are key areas where we need to pay far more attention. There are more than 50 million young children with developmental disabilities. We know that these children are at increased risk with regards to their well-being, access to education, access to health services, risks of abuse. And yet we continue to see limited evidence on what works to serve these children from the majority world. And finally, we cannot negate the role of climate change and its impacts on young children. We know that there is some evidence, but it doesn't delineate what happens in the early years, and we need far better quality of evidence on how climate and extreme weather events affect the youngest children in the majority world. Over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Aisha. So in our paper, we report on estimates of young children's access to nurturing care and development in the next 1,000 days. And this is particularly important since the reviews that Aisha just presented indicated the need for improved access and quality of nurturing inputs. Next slide, please. So firstly, a multi-dimensional index of nurturing care in the next 1,000 days was developed that includes indices of the nurturing care dimensions appropriate for this age group as shown in this graph. And adequate nurturing care was defined as having access to at least one indicator in each of the 5 dimensions of nurturing care. The key finding from these analyses was that only 1 in 4 children 3 to 4 years old are receiving adequate nurturing care in low-middle income countries. And this graph shows the variation across these indices, with children doing better in some areas than others. Next slide. This next slide shows the vast geographical differences in the proportion of children receiving adequate nurturing care, with only 5.6% of children from low-income countries receiving this care. And importantly, these data are not intended to be blaming caregivers for not providing nurturing care, and it is critical that we understand the structural barriers and multiple factors that influence caregivers' ability to provide the care that children need to thrive. Next slide. A second set of analyses drew on data from Save the Children's International Development and Early Learning Assessment with a sample of more than 18,000 3 to 7-year-olds in low-middle income countries. As this graph shows, positive associations were identified between indicators of early learning and responsive care and multiple child development outcomes. Furthermore, we showed that by age 5, children who have received early learning support and responsive care are approximately 2 years ahead in their development. Next slide. Thirdly, we conducted a mapping review of interventions promoting development in the next 1,000 days, published between 1990 and 2020. And interventions promoting healthy development in the next 1,000 days are predominantly delivered in high-income Western countries, with only 5% of published interventions having been implemented in low-income or lower middle-income countries. And these findings highlight the mismatch between the global regions where interventions are most needed and the areas where interventions are being implemented, evaluated, and published. Next slide. So from these review findings, we could see that there are intervention gaps in the next 1,000 days to address parenting, family mental health, violence prevention, and nutrition. As Aisha mentioned, ECCE settings offer a protective environment for promoting development, and this links to the need for a shift from positioning interventions within health platforms, which makes the most sense in the first 1,000 days, but also a shift in stakeholders from prominently in the health sector to the education sector in the next 1,000 days. Lastly, these findings point to the importance of the transitions in both systems and interventions from the first to the next 1,000 days, as well as developmental outcomes and risks as children move from the first to the next 1,000 days. We need to both understand these differences, but also apply a life course perspective in understanding how these transitions can be best navigated. Next slide. So in conclusion, this paper has highlighted how development in the next 1,000 days is multidimensional, cumulative, and continuous. And just as I mentioned, we need to understand this from a life course perspective. We need more evidence on environments influencing development in the next 1,000 days, the disaggregation of findings most salient to the next 1,000 days, and we need more evidence from the majority world, especially in light of young children's increasing vulnerability to risks, such as climate change, violence, pandemics, and geopolitical conflicts. Finally, we can't do this in silos. We have to work together and leverage partnerships across platforms and sectors. And I'm now going to hand over to Gunther and Milagros for paper 2.
Thank you, Catherine. So in the second paper focuses on the cost of not investing in the next 1,000 days and looks at implications for policy and practice. Next slide. The past decade has seen remarkable global growth in global, regional, and national efforts to upscale early child development programs, reduce early disparities, and improve young children's health and well-being. We have evidenced key milestones that include the adoption of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the subsequent launch of both the Global Early Childhood Development Action Network, hosting us today, the Nurturing Care Framework, the G20's commitment to investing in the early years, as well as the launch of regional early childhood initiatives in Africa, Asia Pacific, and Arab regions. We have now experienced a sustained emphasis, probably the longest ever, on nurturing care as a critical for growth and development in the first 1,000 days. And this is visible across multiple regions and countries in the world. And we have also now experienced more targeted global funding and advocacy efforts on nurturing care. In this context, this paper builds on the evidence just presented on the first paper of the series and shifts to a key effort of identifying effective strategies to improve early child development in the next 1,000 days. The evidence we present highlights universal access to at least 1 year of ECCE, early care and education, as a crucial target, summarizes the cost for this across countries, and presents the global and regional cost of inaction and advancing this target. This paper also the conclusion of the series with recommendations for policy, programming, and research, as a range of complementary, developmental, and context-specific home-based and community-based interventions are needed to ensure nurturing care for children in the next 1,000 days. Next slide. So what works for child development in the next 1,000 days? Effectiveness studies in this age group have primarily focused on 4 types of interventions: cash transfers, early care and education, nutritional interventions, and parent interventions. And we also see multi-component approaches which combine some of these. This paper in the series therefore starts with a comprehensive review of these interventions across the globe, highlighting patterns in child outcomes across various developmental domains. This is later on in the paper complemented with the latest estimates of the relationship between enrollment in early childhood care and education programs and long-term outcomes using data from intervention studies, as well as from nationally representative observational data. Next slide. The comprehensive review includes 100 studies and a total of 951 impact estimates across the globe, and finds that programs in the early years continue to show strong potential for impacts on children's development. Positive impacts are evidenced across all regions of the world, as we can see from the x-axis, and also across multiple child development domains and school outcomes. The figure therefore illustrates average effects by child domain, separating longer-term schooling or adult outcomes when these are measured. And within each domain, it shows average outcomes for the regions across the reviewed studies. On average, most of these are positive, even accounting for the variation across studies. Next slide. We also looked at the average across intervention types and regions. The patterns that emerge are quite significant. For cash transfers, which aim to reduce poverty and support child development by improving family well-being, we find moderate effects on impacts on child outcomes. At the regional level, effects appear the largest in Latin America and the Caribbean, where these programs have been most widely used. Conditional cash transfers show on average slightly larger effects than unconditional ones, and common conditions attached to transfers have been the completion of vaccination, attendance, preventing health visits, or growth monitoring. For early care and education programs, which include typically home-based, community-based, and center-based programs, and some integration sometimes of health and monitoring nutrition, we also find large positive effects on children, about 0.31 standard deviations. To put this into perspective, these impacts are equivalent to about 40% of the gap in PISA outcomes for children between low-income countries and high-income countries. The evidence reviewed also points to even larger effects for schooling outcomes, such as reducing the incidence of grade repetition and dropping out, and improving educational attainment. Differences in effects across types of programs and whether implemented by governmental or non-governmental organizations confirm the importance of monitoring and supporting program quality. For parenting interventions, some which sometimes extend beyond the first 1,000 days and become a key strategy to bridge children coming out of the health monitoring systems before they are integrated into early childhood care and education systems, we find also strong positive effects this include children in the we reviewed parenting programs that included children in the next 1,000 days, even if they were not the principal target for the program. For nutrition, a fourth group of interventions that we looked at, during the next 1,000 days, these are common in many low and middle income countries to address continuous exposure to hunger, malnutrition, and growth faltering. And we find average moderate impacts across domains. Finally, we looked at multi-component interventions, which often overlap aspects of cash transfers, early care and education, parent and nutrition programs, and this exists around the world. About half or more of those that we reviewed combine either nutritional or early care and education or parenting components. While on average, multi-component interventions appear to have moderate impacts, programs that combine early care and education with nutritional components have on average larger effects among these. The evidence does point to the difficulty of implementing complex multi-component interventions with fidelity in low-resource contexts. Effective integration is complex and requires intentionally aligning and monitoring quality of the components being integrated and paying attention to implementation challenges associated with the integration. Gunther, passing it on to you.
Thank you very much, Milagros. One of the things that we were particularly interested in was the long-term effects of early childhood care and education. As you've seen in the previous slides, early childhood care and education programs were among the most impactful interventions in the first years of life. But we also have increasingly the opportunity to assess how effective these programs are in the long run. One of the most interesting data sets that are available today to assess this is data from the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA. This data covers 79 mostly high and middle income countries and allows us to compare children and adolescents with respect to their school outcomes, comparing children who attended ECCE and children who are not attending ECCE. To make sure we are not reporting biased estimates here, we controlled for age, sex, household wealth, and paternal and maternal educational attainment. Next slide, please. As you can see in this graph, the differences are quite striking. The blue bar shows math, the red bar shows reading, and the green bar shows science. You can see that with even just 1 year of early childhood care and education, we see about 0.15 standard deviations higher math and reading scores. With 2 years, it's about 1/4 of a standard deviation higher across all 3 domains. Next slide, please. Another study that has come out in the last 15 years is Young Lives. Many of you may be familiar with this data set. It's a cohort study that compares children growing up in Ethiopia, India, Peru, Vietnam over time. And the data set is very rich, comprising both academic scores and behavioral outcomes in adolescents. In our analysis, we use this data set and look at math and reading scores, as well as early consumption of alcohol. Next slide. This first figure focuses on math. You can see on top the outcomes by age 18, at the bottom by age 15, and the pattern is quite clear. Children who attend early childhood care and education perform better. We are seeing about 0.13 standard deviations for math at age 15 and 0.12 standard deviation at age 19. So slightly smaller effects, but these are not statistically different. Next slide, please. The pattern is almost the same for verbal scores, yet the effect size is a bit larger here. We see 0.21 standard deviation for verbal scores at age 15 and 0.13 at age 19. Next. What I think is even more important. Sorry, next slide. Perfect. What's even more important is that the benefits of early childhood care and education go beyond just schooling. What we see is not just an improvement in terms of reading, in terms of math, or maybe science knowledge, but we also see an improvement in healthy behaviors. Specifically here, we look at early drinking. And what you can see in this slide is that children who attend early childhood care and education on average are 6 percentage points less likely to engage in early alcohol consumption. And this difference is particularly large in Ethiopia, where we see a 24 percentage point difference as early as at age 50. Next slide. We also look at the literature comparing children's early life performance in terms of their development and their adolescent performance. And what we can see is a very strong correlation between early life skill attainment and the skills we measure in adolescence. These correlations are strongest for cognition, but we also see a correlation between socio-emotional skills and executive functioning skills, which we can build with appropriate early childhood care and education programs. Next slide. So where are we? And this is maybe one of my favorite figures of the series. As you can see on this slide, the global coverage in early childhood care and education varies a lot. Aisha mentioned at the very beginning that just over half of children today, or at least before COVID, had any kind of access to early childhood care and education. This proportion is over 80% in virtually all of the high-income countries. So if you look at the map, look at Europe, look at even Eastern Europe, look at North America, we are somewhere between 80 and 100%. Look at the South and you see huge differences. You can see that in many of the poorest countries, less than 20% of children today have access to early childhood care and education. And that is just one aspect of course, the inequality we see even within countries that have low access, huge differences with respect to socioeconomic status, with privileged children, of course, on average having much more access than children from the most vulnerable families. Next slide. In order to highlight what needs to be done, we try to compute the cost of providing early childhood care and education, and we came up with an average cost of $333, so $340 roughly per child and year for the typical low and middle income country. At the national level, this means that the cost of providing this is quite low. We're talking about 0.1% of GDP in high-income countries and less than 0.5% of GDP in low-income settings. Just to be clear here, what we quantify here is providing at least 1 year of early childhood care and education for all children in each country. So for some countries, as I've shown in the previous slides, this coverage is already quite high. For some other countries, the gap is quite low, which also explains why the cost on average in low-income countries is higher than the cost in lower middle-income countries, because the current gap to our goal of at least 1 year is just bigger. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits? Well, we have compiled a lot of evidence, I think, in this series to show that the benefits are there in terms of the short run, but also the medium and long run. And we estimate that on average, getting access to early childhood care and education can increase children's cognitive skill by about 1/3 of a standard deviation. And the literature is quite clear regarding the benefits of these improvements. On average, we think that 1 standard deviation in early cognition can yield a 13% increase in adult wages. Now, if we assume that children go work after school and can work for 45 years on average, that gives a quite high return on investment. These returns, in terms of future wages, we discounted 3%, and we assume that there's moderate wage growth just to be conservative. Next slide, please. So the cost of inaction, and when we say cost of inaction, is really the future potential gain in national income that countries could achieve through this investment, is quite substantial. As you can see in this graph, there's huge variation. And on average, of course, the benefits are lowest in high-income countries where the current program coverage is quite high. The benefits are very high in the poorest countries where current program coverage is low, and many children could benefit from basic access to early childhood care and education. Overall, and I think that's maybe one of the key messages, the benefits of these investments are much larger than the costs that these programs will cost. We estimate that on average, the rate or the ratio between benefits and costs is between 9 and 18. Maybe for the poorest countries, think roughly of like a 10%, like a 10 times the return, a 10 to 1 return on investment of early childhood care and education programs in low and middle income countries. So in short, we believe that these programs are highly effective, and not just effective, but also cost effective in the sense of a high return of public investment. With that, back over to you, Milagros.
Thank you, Gunther. So what are key messages from the series? Providing nurturing care during this period requires coordinated efforts across health, nutrition, responsive care, safety and security, and early learning, building from the predominantly health, nutrition, and parenting programs in the first 1,000 days. The series summarizes robust and rapidly growing evidence highlighting short-term and long-term benefits of interventions specific for the next 1,000 days. It shows high-quality early care and education programs can improve short and long-term cognitive and academic outcomes, as well as other behavioral outcomes for children. However, in tandem, parenting programs, cash transfers, and nutritional programs can also contribute positively to child development in this age group. Next slide. Home-based and center-based early care and education programs offer platforms to promote healthy development and leverage partnership across sectors, recognizing the complementarities between children's health, nutrition, healthy behaviors, and early care and education enrollment. Yet the fact is that access to early care and education remains globally low, particularly in low-income countries, with gaps in developmental opportunities persisting and even growing for children in the next 1,000 days. Global action to address these gaps is therefore overdue, and the cost of inaction is quite large. The series estimates providing 1 year of early care education to all children costs on average less than 1% of the GDP, of countries' GDP, while the benefits of providing this 1 year to all children are on average 8 to 19 times larger than the cost of implementing these. These efforts should definitely be complemented by relevant health, nutrition, and/or cash transfer programs to support children's development in different contexts. Next slide. The series puts forward key recommendations for policymakers, program implementers, and researchers in relation to children in the next 1,000 days. At the policy level, a clear recognition of the crucial developmental importance of this period is needed. Multi-sectoral programs to support children in the next 1,000 days need to be developed and promoted globally, building upon the efforts of the first 1,000. At the programmatic level, providing equitable access to adequate nurturing care that includes at least 1 year of high-quality early care education appears to be a first feasible and potentially high-return target for most countries. Most critically, increased attention on the next 1,000 days is imperative for the achievement of SDGs, and the time for global action is now. Ultimately, investments in children in this age group can help countries achieve the ambitious SDGs targets for health, education, and equity, complementing investments earlier on. Thank you. Catherine, passing this to you back.
Thanks, Milagros. So just to end, we just want to take a moment just to say thank you, firstly, to all the co-authors for their contributions. As Aisha mentioned, there's a very large group of us. Everyone participated unfunded. We had many people who assisted with reviews and analyses, and we'd like to thank them for that. Sabine, thank you very much for guiding us along this over 5-year journey from conceptualization to publication. To our advisory group who provided some key inputs, and lastly to ECDAN for partnering with us for this launch. Next slide. So there are a number of links and resources. The 2 papers are available open access. The recording of the webinar and the slides will be available through the ECDAN webinar page. There's an article that's been published in the Conversation Africa today, and they've also produced some videos which will shortly be available, and the article link is provided there. And all that remains is to say thank you for participating, thank you for attending, and we're going to hand back to Sabine now to facilitate the Q&A.
Thanks very much to all of you. Fantastic presentations. And there's so much in these series. And I just want to restate that these are free to access on the Lancet website. They're not behind a paywall. You just need to register. And also you've heard that the slides will be shared, and there is a recording of this for all of you. But now let me go through some of the questions that have popped up in the Q&A section. So I think I'm going to try and go in order as they have been put. So we're talking, somebody's interested in this new concept of the next 1,000 days. And I remember, Kathy, that we had a big discussion on this all throughout the years of this. So there were the first 1,000 days, and then there are next 1,000 days. Could you perhaps explain a little more how you see that as a concept?
Sure. So just to reiterate what Aisha already mentioned, this is not about kind of pitting different stages of the life course against each other or arguing that one is more important. And we're obviously aware that the first 1,000 days is a very precise term. You know, chronologically, the next 1,000 days is less precise. But what we really wanted to take from the terminology of the first 1,000 days is that it's a concept that's simple, it can resonate, it's easy to repeat. And so we wanted to try and capture some of that with the next 1,000 days as a way of bringing attention. So something that not only has scientific relevance, but obviously in early childhood development, there's practitioners, policy makers involved, researchers. And so we wanted a term that would resonate easily across those different groups.
That's great. Thanks, Kathy. And I think that also answers one of the questions that come afterwards, which was, I mean, whoever posed that question was a little concerned that we're pitching two timeframes against each other, and that's absolutely not what you want to do with that series. You want to emphasize that there's a gap that we need to build on the first 1,000 days, and that next 1,000 days are currently neglected. The next question is on the multi-sector approach recommended. Are there existing child-centric measurement frameworks that can showcase the exponential impact of these interventions across health, education, nutrition, etc.? It's someone looking to understand how one as a non-governmental actor can best implement multi-sector interventions and subsequently measure the impact. Big question. Who wants to take that?
I can give it a stab, and if Aisha wants to, while we don't necessarily looked at the measuring monitoring, we do know that there's a lot of efforts across the world to do that, and we do also know from the literature that thinking about across sectors and multi-sectorally, that having common monitoring frameworks and common elements that we're all looking at around children, and whether we're working together horizontally as we work from different levels of the government, and vertically, I mean, vertically as different governments in the world, horizontally across regions and sectors around children's development are critical. So simple frameworks that are easy to use and aligned and across everybody working in the sectors seem to be effective ways of monitoring. But the series does point to the importance of monitoring quality for implementation. Both, it's hard to do. You need to know what you're doing to be able to improve and move the, go north as the GPS would want to. So you need the systems that monitor carefully and look at our quality and our impacts to continuously improve the efforts and get to the investments that we're talking about and the returns that we're talking about.
That's great. Thanks very much. And the next question is about Europe in particular. Why does Europe have huge differences, including negative ones, in the multi-component actions? Who would like to take that question?
Was that in the first paper or the second paper?
I think the second paper with graphs, or pictures or maps.
In terms of the participation in early childhood care and education, I think, Gunther, I think that was the map you were
But
talking about.
I'm not sure to understand the part about the negative. Like, why negative?
Sorry, I don't know. This is just me reading out a question, you know.
I'm trying to look at the slides to see what it might refer to. Could it be one of the regional estimates, Milagros? That we don't have.
I'm opening it as well. I mean, the regional, one second, because I didn't have the slide open.
I think it's the slide 22nd, the Europe, just one study that had found a negative effect with a huge confidence interval.
Oh, yeah. I think we do have some,
Yeah.
okay, if it's that it has to do with the studies that, I mean, not all the countries are effectively, not every intervention is positive, and on average, there are some that have some outcomes. So because we're looking at the different outcomes and not the average across across all the domains, you have some situations, and we do have some case studies of countries that have not looked at quality and had just really tried to do aspects of coverage, and that's, I think, what would be represented there. So again, the attention to quality, intentionally, carefully, when integrating and within each of the aspects of the intervention, whether it's cash judgment, whether it's in the implementation aspect, whether it's early care education, whether it's parenting, it's always important. And this is something that the field has very strongly shown throughout this last decade.
Okay, great, thank you. And then there's a question on which nutrition interventions have been shown to be effective, especially in combination with early care and education.
I think there are different programs that, I mean, there are many, but I do think that one of the things that comes up is that there are some supplementations, not all of them, that are effective. And then the integration that happens more in the next 1,000 days has to do with school feeding and integration around that. So that is one of the areas. That is also one of the pieces in which we talk about in the recommendations, which we do have a panel for recommendations for policy, practice, and research, that we also talk about really understanding integration a little more effectively, because we know that it's embedded, but we know that it's also a black box for us to understand how and which parts of the integration are the ones that are providing the effects that we find.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And then it was great to hear that parenting program had large impact. And what was the age bracket of children taken for estimating the impact in the parenting program in particular?
The ones that are included here are the ones that also include children in the next 1,000 days. Most of those are programs that include children 2 to 3 as well. This is a group that ends up being in a hole between the parenting interventions, the health interventions, the monitoring interventions, the health visits in the beginning, in the next 1,000 days, and then don't really have access to early care and education programs across countries. So parenting interventions typically have been a good resource to bridge that group. So the ones that are included here are the ones that include children above the age of 2.
Okay. And then there's a whole set of questions around definition of early care and education. How is it different from ECD services? What is how many hours in a classroom, subject matter, so quality control. So perhaps somebody could sort of pick all that up together.
I mean, maybe I start by saying that the literature has used a very, very wide set of definitions. And of course, it varies really from like 1.5 hours per day to full time, like 40 to 50 hours per week, from pupils, like teacher ratios from 10 to 1 to 40 to 1. So I think it really varies a lot. And I think we are quite clear in the series that quality does matter. So of course, just providing something is not enough. I think we need to aim for the highest quality that's feasible with the limited resources. When we did the global modeling, we were aiming for full-time, or at least half-time programs, but ideally full-time programs with like a teacher and a teacher assistant for every 30 students. I think that was kind of our goal, but there will for sure be differences across countries and differences also in terms of content. I'm not sure if Aisha, maybe you want to add something on quality.
Only to say that I think that we need to have much more contextualized frameworks about what's the minimum quality that can be achieved across different resource settings. And I don't think we are anywhere close to that in terms of unpacking what that will look like across different settings. So that's where we know early childhood care and education works. But now the next set of questions, the next generation of questions that we really need to unpack is how, in terms of what are those quality factors, process quality in terms of teacher-child interactions, and structural quality, such as the resources available within the classroom to support development and learning. And I think that's where we now need to shift the attention. And we have shifted the measurement attention. So we have tools that are available to help us measure quality, but now we need to align that with the interventions.
That's great. Thank you very much. So the next question is more about the short-term, long-term impact. So is there any evidence to show impact also on social, emotional outcomes?
Maybe I can start. I mean, I think there is definitely some interest on behavioral outcomes. I think particularly from programs coming from the US, I think there's from low and middle income countries, maybe less longer term evidence yet, but that's some area that we also flag for future research. I'm not sure if anybody wants to add to that.
I would say there's some evidence from high-income countries. The social behavioral and the cognitive behavioral, the ones that are all very related. So the aspects around executive functions and persistence in school and all of those are not necessarily separated. So to be able to persist, to stay in grade, to higher educational attainments, and the things that around risky behaviors that Gunther showed as well, are all related, and they are related to social behavioral aspects as well. But to untangle it specifically, we have there's not a lot of measurement of social emotional well-being in adult and long-term outcomes. So that's the aspect that might not see. We see that we see the indirect aspect of that, which is what do these children achieve as adults, and it's related to their well-being. So there's indirect evidence, not direct. I would say not measured that way.
Okay, that's great. And then there are questions around children with disabilities or chronic conditions. So what can we all do to ensure that children with disabilities are included in the interventions? And the developmental progress often doesn't show up well on measurements, although we know that they do benefit. So what can we do more to include children with disabilities and chronic conditions?
Thank you. So I think there's been some progress in terms of integrating screening and monitoring and surveillance of children with disabilities within or at risk of developmental delay and disability within health systems. We now need to match that with the intervention efforts. So we need both targeted interventions that help specifically children with diagnosed disabilities, but we also need to make sure that there are increasing inclusion efforts under our universal programs. And there are some nice examples and case studies from around the world that have been making these efforts. For example, Umid in Mumbai is an example which has really thought about inclusion of children with disabilities in this age group, but we need to tease out those lessons and ensure that they are then disseminated widely.
Okay, that's great. I'm just trying to pick a couple more questions. I know we've run out of time almost, but I think there is one around, measurements and research, and context specific outcomes. So is it that we don't see outcomes from low middle income countries because there's no research done there? So is it a sort of, you know, self-fulfilling prophecy? I know you were having in your recommendations that we need more research in low middle income countries as well. Could perhaps comment on that?
I can comment there. I mean, I think measurement, the contextualization of measurement is a really growing issue in child development more broadly, and certainly through early childhood. There's certainly many challenges around conducting measurement research in majority world countries, getting that research funded, getting it published. So I think there is a positive shift in the right direction, but I think a lot needs to be done, and including kind of the realization that measures developed and optimized in, you know, on the minority of the world's population of children cannot necessarily be cut and pasted into all majority world contexts, and it goes beyond just, you know, language translation. So I think there are some positive moves. I think tools such as the IDELA, just, you know, as one that we included in this paper, are an example of global measures that are optimized for use in global settings. And so I think, you know, we need to be supporting initiatives such as those, and obviously many others that are looking at it, you know, early childhood development from a more global contextualized perspective.
That's great, Catherine. And I'm sorry that we've run out of time and there are still some questions in the Q&A section, but perhaps, you know, you could have a look through and answer them in response to you know, the question that we haven't covered. That'd be great. And now I'll hand back to Shikufi.
Thank you so much, Sabine, and to all the panelists. I do encourage all the panelists to spend some time in the Q&A. There were a lot of questions actually that came up around cash transfer and nutrition having moderate effect sizes compared to others, and what implications does that mean? So 3-4 people asked that same question. So it would be great as we shift to the next panel. Can I invite Dr. Victor Guanchol to please join us? Well, it's my pleasure now to introduce you to our next panel from 3 really important agencies who have a really important role in terms of thinking about the translation of some of this research into action and implementation. First, I want to introduce you to Dr. Victor Aguayo. He's the UNICEF Global Director for Child Nutrition and Development. So welcome, Victor. Amer Hassan, who is the World Bank Senior Economist and lead of Education Global Practice. Welcome, Amer. And Guangzhou Chang, he's from UNESCO. He's the Chief of Education Policy Section. So welcome to the 3 of you. So why don't we begin? Let me start with you, Victor. It would actually just be great for each of the agencies, from your agency's perspective, to just get some reactions and reflections on this particular Lancet series. So we'll begin with Dr. Victor. Why don't you share from UNICEF's point of view, how are you reacting to this Lancet series on the second 1,000 days?
Thank you very much. And thank you, dear colleagues around the world. It really is a pleasure to be with all of you today to launch this new Lancet series on early childhood development. So let me say a couple of things about the first 1,000 days, and then I will transition into the next 1,000 days. And by the way, I love the concept from a communications perspective. The next 1,000 days is a game changer. So thank you for that. Sabine reminded us that the centrality of the first 1,000 days for early childhood development, that is from conception to age 2 years, is well recognized in global research, in global practice, and in global policy as a critical period for physical growth and brain development in children. The previous Lancet series highlighted to us that as many as 250 million children under 5 years of age, and that was 43% of children under 5, were not realizing their full development potential because of poverty or because of malnutrition, or a combination of both. Both poverty and malnutrition, key predictors and indicators of poor development in children. So these figures elevated the criticality of the first 1,000 days for policies, strategies, and programs aiming to improve child nutrition and development. And for us, working on child nutrition and development, this series was a game changer. However, the series that we are presenting today is a wake-up call to all of us. It shows very clearly that work continues in the next 1,000 days. So that period between 2 and 5 years that seems to fall through the cracks of nutrition programs and education programs. As it was reminded to us by the lead writers of the series, this period, 2 to 5 years, is important to build, and this is important on the investments and the gains on growth and development that has been achieved in the first 1,000 days. But it also is a key period to promote protective factors, to mitigate additional risks or existing risks, and to improve growth and development trajectories in areas where perhaps we fell behind or opportunities were lost in the first 1,000 days. The series, and this is important, establishes the crucial role of families, institutions, and systems, not one or the other, but the continuum of the three: families, institutions, and systems, in recalibrating child development potential in the next 1,000 days. So for UNICEF, as you all know, early childhood development is at the core of our mandate. In 2023, that is only last year, we launched our 2030 ECD strategy with the title Early Childhood Development, UNICEF Vision for Every Child. So our goal, the goal of the strategy, is that all children from birth to primary school entry, so perfectly aligned with the first 1,000 days and the next 1,000 days, benefit from policies, programs, and practices that protect, promote, and support survival, growth, and development. Our vision, it is true, puts emphasis on the first 1,000 days, yet it acknowledges that opportunities and risks do exist in the next 1,000 days. Our programmatic emphasis in the first 1,000 days primarily focuses on caregivers, families, and communities, but then is followed by interventions in the next 1,000 days that include early childhood care and education settings and programs where children continue to play, children continue to learn, and children continue to eat. The authors of the series show that early childhood care and education programs are effective at supporting child growth and development in this age range, 2 to 5. Early childhood care and education programs in the next 1,000 days are a key intervention on their own for early learning and education. But they are also a main platform to promote and to monitor children's growth and development, improve children's diets, protect children from violence, and promote positive behaviors and practices. So in conclusion, investing in the next 1,000 days for us in UNICEF, of course, is a moral imperative, but it also is a very strategic imperative for sustainable growth and for equitable development. The authors of the Lancet series, this Lancet series, shows that the cost of inaction is huge, and it is a cost that neither children nor nations can afford. I want to express my gratitude to the Lancet Journal for this series, this 5-year endeavor, our colleagues at the ECD Action Network, and of course, the authors of the series for inviting UNICEF to be part of this important event and this important endeavor. You can count on us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, let's keep it going. Amir, why don't we go to you next?
Sure. Thank you so much.
It would be great to get your perspective from the bank's orientation and reaction to the series.
Sure. So thank you all very much for the invitation. I'd like to start by congratulating the team behind the series for giving an articulate and important voice to the important issue of the next 1,000 days and the high cost of inaction. This is a period of child development that has long been the focus of the World Bank's engagement with our country governments. And it reflects a strong demand that the bank has received from these countries. I'll just give you a few numbers in terms of the scope of the work that the World Bank engages in on these issues. The World Bank's education portfolio that's been focused on early childhood care and education has increased from roughly $700 million back in 2014 to about $3.1 billion in 2024. That's representing an increase from going from about 6% of our portfolio to about 12% of the portfolio. More than half of the focus on early childhood development, which cuts across education, health, nutrition, population, social protection, is in the Africa region. And about a third of this is in fragile and conflict and violence affected countries. In the past 10 years, we've seen an increase in the number of multi-sectoral projects. Today, we have approximately 40% of all ECD projects are multi-sectoral. This compares to less than 5% back in 2014. This sort of recognizes some of the points that the presenters were making this morning about the important role of layering interventions on top of each other to make sure that we cover the range of developmental outcomes that we're interested in targeting in these 1,000 days. I think if we focus on the messaging from the two presentations we've heard today, it underscores the fact that this is a period where development is multidimensional, cumulative, and continuous. I think that's the phrase that I will retain from this morning's presentation. And I would be remiss if I wasn't repeating this number that was cited, which is that benefits range from 8 to 19 times the costs, right? So this is very important. It is very beneficial in the long run, both from a avoiding cost perspective and a gaining benefits perspective. And given the calculations we've seen that it reflects less than 1% of GDP in some cases, it is also well within reach. So the World Bank, along with the partners UNICEF and others represented here today, it stands ready to support this important initiative. We're lucky at the World Bank to have in this endeavor the support of the Early Learning Partnership. And this has allowed the bank to engage on the first 1,000 days as well as the second 1,000 days from a variety of angles. For those of you who may not be familiar with this work, I'll just highlight a few that I think are relevant to this morning's discussion. The first is our Invest in Childcare work, which is looking to support not just children, but also caregivers. It is trying to make sure that the opportunities for childcare exists and allows parents and caregivers to engage meaningfully in the workforce. The next is parenting and caregiving, which I think focuses very squarely on the issue of nurturing care and making sure parents have the tools they need to be able to support their children. Not just by making sure that they go to all the programs that are available, but also providing stimulating care within the home. We do a lot of work on ECD measurement. I know some of the questions this morning have focused on that. IDELA was mentioned, along with a number of organizations represented in this morning's launch. There's also the anchor items in measuring early childhood development. There is work that we do on Read at Home, which is to make sure that reading materials are available for parents and caregivers in the home over and above what might be available to children if they're able to go to school. We focus on early childhood development in fragile conflict-affected settings, as I mentioned. And we're trying to make sure that the messaging and the tools are available to policymakers and governments across the world by engaging in capacity building exercises and having a cohort of ECD fellows, early years fellows, available in key countries, and I think we're at our third cohort right now. So I'll stop there and congratulate everybody for this launch and for this important series, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amar. And Wanchol, I think UNESCO plays an important role, especially in, it's been, 2 years now since Tashkent, and the big push for ECCE, which is a big recommendation from this series. So it would be really helpful to get UNESCO's perspective and reaction to the series as well.
No, thank you very much. I'd like to thank first the Lancet and all the partners around the table for inviting UNESCO to share some of our messages. And the authors also thank you for your congratulations for coming with very important messages as well as findings and also key messages that align, converge strongly with our own findings of the situation. And we found at UNESCO that investment in young children is incredibly insufficient across many countries, especially in low income and low to middle income countries. And this is what we have seen during the COVID-19. And this is what we have been observing during that period. This is why we kind of worked together with many partners, including ECDAN, OMEP, and others, in order to convene the innovative policy dialogue on the issue of ECCE, especially young children that are being ignored during this period. So we worked with partners to organize the World Conference on Early Child Care and Education in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. This was the second World Conference, bringing together many government representatives and also international and regional organizations to discuss about this important issue of why we are failing the young children, which we always say that they are important. Now, during this conference, the member states, UNESCO member states, if I may say this way, UNESCO is comprised of 194 countries, member states, which committed UNESCO to work together with with other organizations, UNICEF, World Bank, OECD, and others, to produce a biannual report. So on early childhood care and education, which we made this time in collaboration with UNICEF to produce this joint report and released it in this year in June. So why I mention this, because the findings of this report, although this is not focused on the next 1,000 days, it is from age 0 to age 8. But the findings, most of the findings that you presented, which are great, align and converge very much with what we have found also in this report, that there is the importance of home community environment for ECCE, and also the need for better leveraging science and the scientific evidence to improve the pedagogy and the curriculum. And also, as we are talking about the crisis, the learning crisis, the global learning crisis, and also the need to strengthen the foundational skills at the primary education level. If we really don't work on strengthening ECCE, especially for the next 1,000 days, I think we are going to fail, and we are not going to provide the condition, the preparation for the children to continue learning and to succeed in life. Now, this is what what the UNESCO has been doing, and I'd like to emphasize the fact that our findings strongly converges with what you produced with this report, especially series number 1. And actually, we are discussing currently for the production of the second edition of the global report. And we are having the technical advisory meeting that in Paris, and this is going to be open also online. If you all these renowned experts and specialists you'd like to contribute to this reporting, I'd like to invite you. I'm going to share. This is the email address. It's easy, ECCE@unesco.org. So please feel free to let know through this email address, ECCE@unesco.org. If you want to participate, we are happy to share with you all the necessary information for you to connect. Now, very quickly about your series number 2, which is on price cost of inaction. I think this complements very well what UNESCO produced earlier this year, but which is focusing on school level and calculating the monetary cost of not paying enough attention to skills development in school children. This will create something like $10 trillion each year that the world is losing globally. So I think you can share this. I hope that you have this publication, and we are happy to continue this dialogue with you and also with other partner organizations. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Juanchol. So a question I have for Victor, Amer, and Juanchol is, and I'm seeing it come up in the questions a lot as well, and it's the promise, and Victor, you mentioned it in your opening remarks, it's communications gold, the next 1,000 days. However, I would love for all three of you to sort of reflect on what are the promises of using this communication around the next 1,000 days, but also what are the risks? Whether we're trying to say we're done with the first 1,000 days and now we're on to the next 1,000, or how do we sort of bring in that the importance of the continuum of care across and making sure that we're addressing across that. And I know in the implementation piece, a lot of people are talking about multi-sectoral approaches and so on and as well, which is something the sector has been talking about for decades. But I'm going to actually read to you Meniza's question, where she says that this new series is excellent and the new evidence is telling us that the that the job is not done in the first 1,000 days. It's telling us that we mustn't stop at the first 1,000 days and push through the same energy. So how do we make sure we all remain consistent in that message and do not give the impression that we're now suggesting something new and a change of focus? So first, it would be good to get some more reflections on how we can use this opportunity of the communication around the second 1,000 days, but then also how do we not lose the attention of the first 1,000 days and building on that continuum of care across the early childhood years. So it would be great, Victor, if we can begin with you.
I'm happy to do it. I don't think it is an either or. At least from a UNICEF perspective, it is very clear that it starts with the first 1,000 days and it continues with the next 1,000 days. So it's not either or. Having said that, I think we need to pay attention to a couple of things. One is the real world where we live, where we have three major threats, in my opinion. We have growing crisis in low and middle income countries, COVID, conflict, the climate crisis, declining financial resources for children overall, for young children in particular. And the authors also mentioned this, insufficient data about children in this next 1,000 days. Therefore, I think we need to be cognizant of the world we live in low and middle income countries, and then maximize what we have and advocate for more and advocate for better. For UNICEF and for us, what it means is maximize what we have is a life cycle approach that starts with emphasis on the first 1,000 days, that is pregnancy and the first 2 years of life, primarily focus on families, on communities, on caregivers, and then follow with interventions in the next 1,000 days that includes families, communities, and caregivers, but also ECD and early childhood care and education programs. Children continue to play, continue to learn, continue to eat. So it's very important. I also feel that we need to maximize, and in UNICEF for us, this is a mantra, our leading by example. If we're asking governments to put in place multi-sectoral programs and multi-sectoral policies, multi-sectoral agencies like UNICEF need to lead by example. And in our case, the way we are dividing up the work as a continuum of care for children in the first 1,000 and next 1,000 days is with our nutrition program playing a lead role on early childhood nutrition and development in the first 1,000 days. Our education program playing a lead role on early childhood care and education in the next 1,000 days, and our social policy program playing a key role in promoting multi-sectoral policies and programs. So leading by example, that we are integrating our work, that we are not making a distinction or choosing between the first or the second 1,000 days, that it is a continuum of care that starts with conception and ends when children start primary education. I think that is the way to go. From a communication perspective, and this will be my final word, I think it is a major success from the Lancet series and the authors to think and help us think of something as simple as the next 1,000 days. Over.
Brilliant. Thank you. Amir, Gwentol, do you want to add anything to some of the reflections from Victor? Go ahead, Amir, and then Gwentol, yeah.
So no, I'd like to echo what Victor has just said, right? I mean, I think the fact that we're talking about the next 1,000 days is an important piece of the key phrase from today, right? Multidimensional, cumulative, and continuous. I think that reflects that this isn't a dichotomy. This isn't a pick one or the other, right? You have to layer upon the foundations if you're going to get the outcomes you're interested in the long run. I think Victor is absolutely right. We're all seeing this. The demands on government's purse strings are increasing, whereas the sources of funding are not. And so we have to make sure that these kinds of messages articulate the fact that, you know, this cost of inaction is not, you're not just avoiding an expense right now, you're also incurring a cost in the future. So I think these messages are important. The promise is apparent in some of the evidence that has been presented today. I think the risks, and some of the people in the Q&A are asking this question, right? I mean, the multi-sectoral agenda has been pretty apparent on the bank side since we launched the Human Capital Project, right? That index that we had and continue to have looked at survival, schooling, and health, and looked at the life course, saying these are things that have to happen continuously and they have to be incremental, cumulative. So I think that this initiative, this communication device is very important, because as we go into these conversations with client governments, being able to sort of describe how we're not saying one or the other, we're saying one and the other. I think that helps in the communication. So I very much appreciate the framing. Thank you.
So Amar, just to be a little bit provocative, there's a question in the Q&A that tries to touch upon this, saying that if you did have to approach governments to make decisions in terms of how to use their scarce resources, whether in the first 1,000 days or the next 1,000 days, what would be your response? And I know you touched upon that, but I just want to push that a little bit more.
Sure. I mean, I think that's part of what the second paper in the series is also trying to lay out, right? Is the various interventions, how they come together, how the impact can manifest on the ground or not. The bank has done a lot of work with a lot of partners on something called the Global Education Advisory Panel that also looks at what's a smart investment, because not all investments are created equal and not all implementation systems exist on the ground in the same way as we would ideally like them to. So looking at the history of the evidence from small-scale initiatives to large-scale initiatives, we have sort of some of the pieces of information to have these conversations with the governments. Thanks.
Super. Thanks, Amar. Wanchal, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. No, I agree with what the other colleagues from other organizations have mentioned. Now, I think the question is, we know what's happening, so what and why, but we don't know how to solve the problems. So we are facing the hard reality at country level and also around the world. UNESCO has come with some estimates of in order to ensure 1 year pre-primary enrollment universal before the primary schooling, we need 6 million more educators to enroll in for this pre-primary, which correspond to the last 300 days of the next 1,000 days. So the challenge is huge. We don't know how to come up with filling out this gap. And also the second reality is that it would cost annually around $45 billion to enroll all children in 1 year of primary school in low income and low to middle income countries, out of which there is a financing gap of 21 million, which is representing almost half of what is required. So what do we do? What do we have to do in order to ensure at least 1 year of pre-primary universal enrollment? I don't have an answer, but I'm surrounded by my colleagues next to me who are whispering a number of good suggestions and so on, which I'm not going to quote everything, but I think the first important thing is that there is I would say that in many countries the legal dimension obligation is very weak when it comes, especially when it comes to early childhood. I think there is need to strengthen the ECCE rights in many countries. So this will involve first, also at the global level, we work together in order to strengthen the legal normative instrument when it comes to early childhood care and education. Second is that I think there is an issue of teacher educator shortage, the shortage of ECC workforce. Even if there are people, they don't want to come necessarily to work in this area, which has to do with the weak working conditions, professionalization of this profession, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to do more to value the profession of this early child care and education area. And then another thing that I'd like to say is that in any case, we are faced with a shortage of resources. In the short term, we cannot come up with all the resources required to provide necessary conditions for the children to survive and thrive. Now, I think in this difficult situation of hard decision making, I think there is need also to prioritize, especially for the most disadvantaged children,
Thank you.
because I think those who have, they can find always the way to with their parents with support. But I think
Thank
what
you.
is the most challenged and who's going to be challenging in the future, especially if you want to address the learning crisis, as well as to reduce the disparities in the next
Thank
stage.
you, Wancho.
I think we have to prioritize these
Thank
young
you so much.
children.
Thank you. No, thank you for those excellent
over
reflections.
to
We're
you.
running out of time. Sorry, Wancho, I just want to squeeze in one more question for Victor and Amer, and then I'll hand it back over to Catherine to close us out. One last question that I have, Amer and Victor, and one thing that the first Lancet series, the first 1,000 days Lancet series did really well was elevate the important role of caregiving and parents. And I think this series is also highlighting that issue. And so the question I have for you is, parenting, you know, to date we have a lot of evidence in parenting programs, but they're not reaching the scale that they need to. And oftentimes the results are varied at scale as well. So and there are a lot of different efforts going on with the Global Initiative to Support Parents and Aisha's work with Common Elements at Harvard to try to see, you know, what are the actual elements that create the changes, the particular targeted parent and child behavior outcome changes that we're interested in. But from your point of view, what is it going to take for us to really take parent and caregiver support to scale? I mean, that's a truly cross-sectoral area, truly, you know, across platforms and services. Many different sectors have interest in reaching parents and, you know, influencing parent behavior. So just a quick, if you can share some quick wisdom, some insights on what is it going to take for us as the field to go from scaling, you know, small single packages, single issue packages around early childhood or violence prevention or adolescent, to really taking a more systemic approach to supporting caregivers and parents across the board. Victor?
I think it's a very good question, and one that we need to take very seriously. Given the limited financial resources in most of the countries where we work, and I am referring to low and middle income countries, parenting programs are going to be of the essence. So what is the reality of parents? We have an increasing number of parents having fewer children in most countries where we work. We also have, luckily, an increasing number of parents and small families who are less poor than it used to be a few years back or a couple of decades back. But we still do not have the fiscal space to put in place good quality early childhood care and education programs, let alone centers. Therefore, these next 1,000 days, from 2 to 5, parents still have a major role to play. And it is true that there is a vacuum. We are, I think, doing a pretty good work in supporting parents during the first 1,000 days, during pregnancy and the first 2 years of life. And then all of a sudden we forget parents, and we forget how to support them with information, with counseling, with support, with problem solving. I think having sectoral packages to support parents on health, nutrition, water and sanitation, education, early childhood development is good. But I think the same way that we had Facts for Life, that was a major success in UNICEF many years back and was a key contributor to the child survival revolution, I think we probably need to have Facts for Development. That is what every single mother, father, small family, young family, first-time family needs to know about child development, and what are the health, nutrition, water and sanitation, education, stimulation, and protection actions and interventions that will support great development for kids, not only in the first 1,000 days, but also in the next 1,000 days. We do have, to finish, good examples from Lebanon, for example, with an early childhood development program that has a major parenting program component. Rwanda, where ECD centers also include parenting programs. And most importantly, and very recently in Europe and Central Asia, our BEBO application, which is a platform where parents can access the information, the support, the counseling, and the troubleshooting they need to do a better job as parents and to support their kids develop to their full potential. So parenting, yes, a must.
Thank you. Amer, last word to you, and then over to Catherine to close us out so that we can end on time. Amer?
Sure. No, so I think that this is an important area. I think you've already highlighted some of the big teams that are getting up to work on this stuff. Some of the authors of these series have done reviews of parenting interventions and tried to tweak out what's happening at a pilot level that isn't quite translating at scale. And the bank is currently actually working on some of these issues, trying to identify what governments and government teams and bank teams can be working on to try and make sure that they have a good system in place to reach parents with key messages. Because I think what we're trying to do is not so much influence parental behavior as it is we're trying to expand parental information sets, right? I can say this as a parent, the number of things I didn't know has just grown exponentially, right? So knowing some of the issues that you need to be aware of as a parent is, I think, part of the challenge that we're trying to tackle. The behavior will follow pretty easily after that. But making sure we have the right messages in place and the right modalities for delivering those messages is something that we're actively trying to prioritize. Thanks.
Super. Thank you so much. And I know we're at time. So Catherine, over to you. And Wanchul, we want to hear UNESCO's perspective on parenting as well. So can I invite you in the chat if you can share a little bit about what data on parenting you have and information on UNESCO as well? It would really be helpful for us. But because we're out of time, I just want to give the floor to Catherine to close us out. Over to you, Dr. Draper.
Thanks, Shikufe, and thank you to all the panelists for sharing your valuable insights. And yeah, thank you to everyone for attending. We'd just like to remind you about all the links that have been posted in the chat. Again, please read and share the articles. And obviously the webinar link is going to be available, the slides and the recording of the webinar. And as with many of these things, this is the launch. There's been a long journey to get here, but this is the start of the next leg of the journey to actually disseminate and to bring this work to life and to take action. We'd love to take up the conversation about regional possibilities for launching the events, local opportunities. So please do get in touch with us. Both Milagros and my emails are on as corresponding authors of the papers. So please get in touch if you would like to take any of those ideas forward, and we'd love to hear from you. And thanks again, and thank you again to the Lancet for giving us this opportunity and for ECDAN for hosting the webinar.
All right, with that, it's a close. Congratulations on a very successful launch, everyone. And thank you again to the team. Thank you to the Lancet. Thanks, everyone.